I never thought I'd be driving to a restaurant with Emily, the woman my wife has always been jealous of, to ruin Elise's date with someone who doesn't even exist. Not that she has any idea. She thinks tonight will be thrilling, romantic, her big escape from the boring husband she's so tired of. But tonight isn't about her excitement. It's about mine. Elise has no clue I've been planning this for days, setting everything up to ensure she never sees me the same way again. By the time the night is over, she won't think of me as boring. She won't think of me as weak. And she'll definitely never think she can fool me again. I kept one hand steady on the steering wheel as Emily chatted beside me, unaware of the storm brewing in my head. She thought this was just a casual dinner between old friends. That's exactly what I wanted her to think. The restaurant came into view, its warm glow spilling out onto the dark street. I pulled into the parking lot, the tires crunching on the gravel, and parked in a spot that gave me a clear view of the windows. I killed the engine, but we didn't get out right away. Elise was already there. She sat near the corner, her back to the door, sipping a glass of wine. She wore the red dress I'd given her for our anniversary. Ironic, really. She kept glancing at her phone, probably reading the latest message from her lover. She had no idea I was watching. No idea that tonight, the lies and fantasies she's been telling herself would crumble in front of her. Emily turned to me, her brow furrowed. "Mark, are we going in?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I kept my eyes on Elise, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "She has no idea what's coming," I finally said, my voice low. And with that, I stepped out of the car. "Okay, let's start from the beginning. Hi, my name is Daniel, and my wife's name is Elise. We've been married for 10 years. We have a 7-year-old daughter, Mia, who is equal parts sharp-witted and endlessly curious. She's the kind of kid who'll ask a question like, "Do fish ever get bored?" while you're driving, and she won't stop until you give her a real answer. She's my whole world, and Elise's too, at least I used to think so. Elise and I met in college. She was an accounting major, practical, precise, and always in control. Her calm, measured way of seeing the world balanced out my ambitious streak. I was always chasing big goals, studying Chinese and dreaming of a future that would take me to places we'd only ever seen in magazines. She liked that I had drive, and I admired her grounded nature. Together, we felt unstoppable. After college, I landed a job that sent me to China for months at a time. It wasn't easy, but Elise and I made it work, or so I thought. She managed things at home with the same efficient discipline she brought to everything, while I focused on building a future for all of us. When I came home every few months, I tried to fit back into the life she kept running without me, but it was clear that her routines didn't really need me. It was subtle at first, but the cracks in our marriage started forming long before I noticed them. When I finally came home for good, I thought things would settle. I wanted to reconnect, to feel like a team again, but Elise had changed, or maybe I had. The distance between us wasn't physical anymore, but it was still there, growing wider every day. And then there was Carol, Elise's mom. If Elise was calm and organized, Carol was a whirlwind of opinions and unsolicited advice. She needed to know everything, where we spent our money, what school Mia was going to, and even what I was cooking for dinner. I used to call her some kind of all-consuming dinosaur. Elise thought I was exaggerating, but I wasn't. Carol didn't just meddle. She bulldozed her way into our lives. Once, she showed up unannounced with a box of curtains she thought would brighten up our living room. She didn't ask if we needed new curtains. She just hung them up. And Elise? She didn't say a word. That's the thing with Elise. She avoided conflict like the plague. Whenever I pushed back against Carol's constant interference, Elise would shrug and say, "She means well." That phrase became her excuse for everything Carol did, from inviting herself on our family trips to questioning our parenting choices in front of Mia. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. Carol was just background noise, and Elise and I were still partners, right? But the little things started adding up. Elise became quieter, more withdrawn. She spent more time at work, and when she was home, she always seemed distracted. My anxiety grew with every passing day. I have an analytical mind, it's how I've always been. I can't ignore patterns, no matter how much I try. And with Elise, the patterns were glaring. The way she avoided my questions with half-hearted answers. The way her phone was always in her hand, the screen tilted away from me. The nights she'd come home later than usual, claiming she got caught up at the office. None of it was enough to accuse her of anything, but it gnawed at me. I couldn't stop analyzing every detail, piecing together a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Something was off. I could feel it and I couldn't let it go. Started with her phone. Elise had left it on the kitchen counter one evening while I was fixing Mia's tablet. The screen lit up with a notification, something about a backup error, and she casually asked if I could take a look at it. "You're better with this stuff than I am," she said, handing it over without a second thought before heading upstairs to put Mia to bed. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't trying to snoop. But as I scrolled through the settings, trying to figure out what was causing the issue, a different notification popped up. A dating app. At first, I froze, my brain struggling to process what I'd just seen. Elise wasn't the type for things like that. She was practical, methodical, not someone who made impulsive decisions. But there it was, clear as day. The notification disappeared as quickly as it came, but I couldn't unsee it. My hands shook slightly as I opened the app, and there it was, her profile. Her name wasn't listed, just some vague pseudonym, but it was her picture staring back at me. A photo I'd taken myself, no less, on a family vacation last year. The caption beneath it read, "Looking for excitement. Married to a nice guy, but life is too short for boring." I sat there, staring at those words, feeling like the ground had been yanked out from under me. Boring. That's what she thought of me? After everything? I scrolled further, reading through her profile. It wasn't just the words she used, it was the tone. Casual, playful, confident in a way I hadn't seen her in years. She talked about wanting to feel alive again, and finding someone who understands the thrill of spontaneity. My heart pounded as I kept reading, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. Was this how she saw herself now? How she saw us? Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to march upstairs and demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was denial. Or maybe it was the realization that I needed to know how far she'd take this. So I didn't say anything. Not that night, anyway. Instead, I created an account of my own. It was simple enough. A few stock photos, a carefully crafted bio. Just enough to be intriguing without giving too much away. I imagined the kind of man Elise would gravitate toward. Confident but not cocky. Adventurous but not reckless. I wanted to see what she was really looking for, and I knew she wouldn't show that to me. Within a day, we matched. I felt a strange mix of rage and adrenaline as I sent the first message, something innocuous about her taste and style. She replied almost immediately, her tone flirtatious but cautious, testing the waters. It didn't take long for her to open up. At first, the conversations were light, her favorite movies, places she wanted to visit. But as the days passed, she grew bolder. She started venting about her life, about me. My husband? He's nice, I guess, but he's so predictable. He never does anything exciting. I feel like I'm just going through the motions. Her words cut deeper than I thought they would. I wasn't sure what hurt more, her discontent or the fact that she'd never said any of this to me. I played the role perfectly, asking just the right questions to keep her talking. She told me things I didn't want to know, things I couldn't stop reading. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I hadn't married him. He's so spineless. He wouldn't cheat on me if you paid him. Too weak-willed. Spineless. Weak. Boring. I clenched my fists as I stared at the screen, her words burning into my brain. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I asked her if she'd like to meet. Her answer came almost instantly. Yes. That was the moment I decided there was no going back. Boring. She thinks I'm boring? The words looped in my mind, each repetition hitting harder than the last. My hand tightened around my coffee mug, and for a moment, I thought it might crack. Elisa's words burned in my brain. Too predictable. Too weak-willed. Too boring. I scoffed aloud, the sound bitter and sharp. Boring? I muttered. I gave up all the fun for her because she's so conservative, and yet I'm the boring one? I pushed back in my chair, staring out the window at the overcast sky. Before Elise, my life had been anything but dull. I lived fast. Parties, friends, the kind of adventures that didn't end until the sun came up. My friends used to joke I could charm anyone, and they weren't wrong. I'd had admirers, plenty of them, and how many of them were models? The memory brought a wry smirk to my lips. Elise had no idea. She couldn't even imagine the life I'd had before her. I'd left it all behind when I met her. I told myself I didn't need any of it anymore, that she was enough. For years, I played the devoted husband. I dropped my old friends, stopped going out, even cut ties with my best friend. Emily. The name slipped into my mind like an old melody. Emily. She'd been more than a friend back then, but that was long before Elise. After Elise came into the picture, I'd ended things and stayed away. For her. Because Elise couldn't stand the idea of me staying close to Emily. I smirked, the edges of my plan starting to take shape. You think I'm boring, Elise? I murmured. I'll show you just how boring I am. The more I thought about it, the more the plan began to crystallize in my mind. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted something deeper, something calculated. Elise didn't deserve to have her life ruined. She was still the mother of my child, after all. But she'd made a fool of me, and she needed to feel the weight of her decisions. I won't destroy her life, no. My voice was calm now, deliberate. But I will do everything to break her down emotionally. I'll make her regret 100 times over where she's led our family. Slowly, carefully, I'll drain her energy with my brilliant plan. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile spreading across my face. She's awakened a dark side of me. One I haven't touched in years. My old friends used to call me the darkest Daniel when I got into one of my moods. It was a joke back then. A playful nickname for how I always outmaneuvered everyone, whether it was a card game, a prank, or something more serious. But this wasn't a joke. Not anymore. And now, I murmured. The darkest Daniel is stepping into the game. Once the plan had formed, it didn't take me long to figure out the perfect person to include. Emily. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Not since Elise demanded I cut ties. She didn't outright say it at first, of course. She phrased it carefully, the way she always did when she wanted something but didn't want to sound controlling. I just don't understand why you need to stay in touch with her. You know she used to like you, right? That was Elise's problem with Emily. She was too much of everything Elise couldn't stand. Too confident, too independent, too aware of her own appeal. Elise once admitted she thought Emily was waiting for our marriage to fall apart, ready to swoop in and pick up the pieces. For years, Elise's jealousy had felt unfounded. I never saw Emily that way, not after I met Elise. But now, as I stared at her profile picture on social media, a memory came back to me. It was the way Emily used to look at me back then. Like she saw through every mask I wore and liked what she found underneath. She had this laugh, loud and unrestrained, that could make a room feel electric. Elise hated her for that, too. She's so flashy, Elise once said after meeting Emily at a party. She doesn't know how to tone it down. Flashy or not, Emily was still single. And I couldn't deny she had always liked me, even if she'd never said it outright. That was years ago, though. A lifetime ago. Still, she'd never married. Never settled down. I didn't hesitate as I clicked her name and sent a message. It was simple, casual. Just a friendly invitation to meet up for dinner. Like no time had passed at all. I chose the cafe where Elise was supposed to meet her lover. Down to the same date and time. Emily responded within minutes, her tone warm and enthusiastic. It's been so long, Daniel. I'd love to catch up. I leaned back, satisfied. It was perfect. Emily had always been a sore spot for Elise, a reminder of the life I'd had before her. And now, she'd play a key role in my plan to unravel everything Elise had taken for granted. This wasn't about starting anything with Emily. I had no intention of complicating things further. But she was the perfect weapon, one Elise wouldn't see coming. And it wasn't just about jealousy. Bringing Emily to that cafe was about control. About showing Elise that the boring, weak-willed husband she thought she could manipulate wasn't as predictable as she believed. Well, here we are, driving, I thought to myself, glancing at Emily out of the corner of my eye. I'd picked her up from work not long ago, and she was in a great mood, beaming, chatting away about something funny that had happened in her office. She looked amazing, too, dressed in a fitted navy blouse and heels that made her look effortlessly polished. She'd always had that natural charisma, the kind that turned heads without even trying. I made the usual small talk, nodding and smiling where I needed to, but my mind wasn't really there. I couldn't stop thinking about what was coming next, about the look on Elisa's face when she saw us walk in together. That's the plan. Show up with another woman and act like I don't even notice her.
No confrontaschen. No accusations.
Just let it sink in. What will she do? That question kept turning over in my mind as I drove. Elise told me earlier that she'd be spending the night at a friend's place. Sure, she said it casually enough, but I knew exactly what that meant. Her plan was to meet her lover, have a few drinks, and then what? Take him to a hotel? To our house? But now, she's going to walk into that cafe expecting excitement and passion, only to find me sitting at a table with someone else. How will she react? Will she storm out? Confront me? Pretend not to notice? It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was curiosity, pure and simple. I wanted to see her squirm. I wanted to watch her try to reconcile the image of her boring, spineless husband with the man who dared to show up on a date of his own. And yet, I had to be careful. I didn't want to give myself away too soon. The success of this entire plan hinged on timing, on keeping my poker face intact. Emily shifted in her seat, pulling me back to the present. "You're quiet tonight," she said, glancing at me with a teasing smile. "Nervous about catching up with an old friend?" I smirked, shaking my head. "Not at all. Just a lot on my mind." She nodded, taking my answer at face value, and I relaxed a little. Emily had no idea what this dinner was really about, and that's exactly how I needed it to stay. For now, she was just a passenger in my plan. A key part of it, sure, but unaware of the larger game at play. As we turned into the cafe parking lot, I felt my pulse quicken. I spotted Elisa's car almost immediately, parked toward the far end of the lot. I parked a few spaces away, giving myself a moment to steady my nerves. Emily reached for her bag, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm really glad you reached out, Daniel. It's been way too long." "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone light. "It has." And as we stepped out of the car, I couldn't help but glance toward the cafe windows, searching for Elise. My heart raced, anticipation and fury swirling together. "Let's see what you do now," I thought. The cafe was warm and inviting, the faint hum of conversation blending with the sound of coffee machines and clinking glasses. Elise was sitting near the corner, her head bowed over her phone, completely absorbed. She didn't notice us walk in. Perfect. I guided Emily to a table with a clear view of Elise but far enough away that we wouldn't draw immediate attention. Emily glanced around, taking in the cozy atmosphere as she slipped off her coat. She looked radiant, her hair catching the soft light as she smiled at me. "This place is nice," she said, her voice light. "I see why you picked it." I smiled back, nodding. "Yeah, it's one of my favorites." We ordered coffee, and Emily launched into a story about her latest project at work. I nodded along, keeping my tone relaxed, but my eyes kept darting toward Elise. She was still scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm brewing just a few tables away. For a while, everything seemed normal, too normal. Emily was animated, laughing easily as she recounted some office drama, but I could feel the tension building beneath the surface. It was only a matter of time. And then it happened. Emily leaned in slightly, her brow furrowing. "That woman over there," she said, lowering her voice. "She's staring at us. It's really strange. Like she's panicking or something." I didn't even have to look. I already knew. Calmly, I replied, "That's my wife." Emily's eyes widened, and she sat back, clearly caught off guard. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. "Completely serious." For a moment, She didn't say anything, her gaze flickering between me and Elise. Does she know I'm here? She does now, I said, glancing in Elise's direction. Sure enough, Elise's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something I couldn't quite place. Her phone sat forgotten on the table as she stared at us. Frozen. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Daniel, what's going on? I leaned back, keeping my voice steady. Nothing you need to worry about. Just an unexpected coincidence. Emily didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. She reached for her coffee, trying to mask her discomfort, while Elise continued to stare, her panic growing more evident by the second. I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. Elise was always so composed, so in control. But now her mask was slipping. I could see the questions racing through her mind. Why is he here? Why is he with her? Does he know? I didn't look at her directly, didn't acknowledge her presence beyond that brief glance. Instead, I turned back to Emily, smiling as though nothing was wrong. So, I said, steering the conversation back to safer ground, tell me more about that project you're working on. Emily hesitated, clearly uneasy, but eventually picked up where she left off. I listened, nodding at all the right moments, but my focus remained on Elise. This was exactly what I'd wanted, to make her squirm, to let her wonder how much I knew, to feel the weight of her decisions closing in around her. And this was only the beginning. I couldn't hold back any longer. Watching Elise squirm in her seat, her face pale and her hands gripping the edge of the table, was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. I needed to hear what she'd say, to see her unravel completely. I stood and excused myself to Emily. Be right back, I said casually, as though nothing unusual was happening. As I approached Elise's table, her eyes widened, and she sat up straighter, like a deer caught in headlights. She tried to pick up her phone, but her trembling hands betrayed her. What's wrong, sweetheart? I said smoothly, stopping just in front of her table. You look a little tense. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Finally, she managed to stammer, what are you doing here? And with her. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. With her? Oh, you mean Emily? I gestured back toward our table, where Emily was watching the scene with visible unease. We're just catching up. Old friends, you know? Elise's jaw clenched. You know I told you not to talk to her. What are you doing here with her? Of all people. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make her uncomfortable. Do you have any complaints, Elise? Feeling a little unsure about my loyalty all of a sudden, her face flushed, and she glanced around the cafe, clearly hoping no one was paying attention. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, I said, keeping my tone light but deliberate. It's funny, isn't it? All this time you've been so sure of yourself, so sure that I'd never find out. And now, you don't look so sure anymore. Her expression began to shift, her panic giving way to something else, realization. I watched as it dawned on her, her lips parting slightly as she pieced it together. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. Was it you? I smirked, leaning back and crossing my arms. Yes, Elise. It was me, your boring husband. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. But I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned on my heel and walked back to Emily, leaving Elise to sit there with the weight of her choices crashing down on her. Emily stood as I returned, her brows knitted with concern. Daniel, what's going on? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said smoothly, placing a hand on her back and guiding her toward the door. Let's head out. We stepped into the cool night air, and Emily turned to face me as we stood by the car. That was your wife, wasn't it? She asked, her voice careful, like she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. It was, I admitted, not bothering to elaborate. She shook her head, clearly baffled, but didn't push further. I glanced back toward the cafe, and there she was, Elise, standing at the window, watching us like her life depended on it. I met her gaze for a brief moment before turning back to Emily. "Sorry about this," I said softly, "but I need to do something." Before she could ask what I meant, I leaned in and kissed her. It was slow, deliberate, and just passionate enough to make sure Elise could see everything. Emily stiffened in surprise at first but quickly melted into the kiss, her hands resting lightly on my shoulders. When we pulled apart, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes searching mine for answers. "What was that about?" she asked. "Just tying up some loose ends," I said, stepping around her to open the car door. I glanced back toward the café one last time. Elise was still there, her hand pressed against the glass, her face a mask of shock and pain. As I walked to the driver's side, halfway to the car, a dark thought crossed my mind. She has no idea what I'm going to do next. And that thought, it made me smile. Well, the next step of my plan wasn't as brutal as what happened at the café, but it had to be done. I decided it was time to let everyone, our mutual friends, her colleagues, and even our family, know exactly what a wonderful, faithful wife Elise had been. I wasn't subtle about it. It started with a tweet. Something simple, sharp, and designed to sting. "Amazing how someone can play the perfect spouse while secretly planning their escape. Here's to loyalty and boring husbands everywhere." I didn't tag her, but I didn't need to. The people who mattered would see it, and they did. My phone buzzed relentlessly for the next several hours. Friends, family members, even casual acquaintances flooded my inbox with questions and, in some cases, awkward attempts at sympathy. I ignored most of them. This wasn't about seeking validation, it was about planting the seeds. Elise, of course, saw it too. She texted me almost immediately, "What the hell is wrong with you? Why are you airing our private business in public?" I didn't respond. Let her stew. A day or two passed, and the fallout began to spread. People started talking, whispering, speculating. The cracks in Elise's carefully curated image were starting to show. It wasn't long before I got the message that changed everything. It came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. An old acquaintance I barely remembered from before Mia was born. His name was Jason, and his message was brief but intriguing. "Saw your tweet. I have something to share with you. Let's grab a coffee." At first, I didn't know what to make of it. Jason and I were never close, just someone I'd run into at parties back in the day. But something about his tone caught my attention. So I agreed to meet him the next afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. Jason was already waiting when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee in front of him. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes from too many bad decisions. He stood when he saw me, extending a hand. "Daniel, thanks for coming." I shook his hand and sat down across from him, cutting straight to the point. "What's this about, Jason?" He hesitated, glancing down at his coffee before meeting my eyes. "It's about Elise," he said quietly. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Go on." He took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to be honest. While you were working in China, Elise and I, well, we were involved." The words hit like a punch to the gut. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Involved?" I repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" Jason winced. "We slept together. A few times. She told me you two had broken up, that it was over between you, and she was moving on. I believed her." I stared at him, my mind racing. So, this hadn't started recently. Elise had been unfaithful long before the dating apps and the cafe. And she'd lied to cover her tracks even back then. Jason kept talking, his voice heavy with regret. At first, it seemed fine. She was, I don't know, distant but willing, I guess. Then, out of nowhere, she ghosted me. Stopped responding to my calls, my texts, everything. I didn't know what happened until I saw her with you a few months later. He looked down at his coffee again, his shoulders slumping. "I felt like crap about it ever since. I thought you should know. You deserve to know."
I'm sorry.
I leaned back in my chair, letting his words settle. Anger burned in my chest, but it wasn't directed at Jason. He'd been a pawn in Elisa's game just like I had. After a long moment, I nodded. Thanks for telling me. It means more than you know. Jason nodded back, visibly relieved, and we sat in silence for a while. I didn't say much else before leaving, my thoughts spinning as I walked back to my car. As I started the engine, one thing became clear. Elisa's betrayal went far deeper than I'd imagined, and if she thought the game was over, she was sorely mistaken. I sat in my car for a long time after meeting Jason, staring blankly at the dashboard. I couldn't reconcile the Elise I knew or thought I knew with the person he'd described. The wife who had always been so measured, so put together, had been carrying on an affair while I was thousands of miles away. And not just one affair. It was so out of character for her that I found myself questioning everything. Was this really who Elise was? Or was there something deeper going on? I didn't have long to dwell on it before my phone buzzed with a new text. It was from Elise. I'm sick. Please hear me out. I had to do this. I stared at the screen, her words twisting in my mind. Had to? I thought bitterly. That sounded like an excuse. A last-ditch effort to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. Still, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet with her. I had questions that only she could answer, and if nothing else, I wanted to see her face when I asked them. We met at a small diner near her parents' house. She'd been staying with them since I threw her out, and the thought of her sulking in that house under her mother's watchful meddling I would have been funny if the situation weren't so serious. Elise was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth with a coffee cup in front of her. She looked pale, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger, almost vulnerable. But I wasn't about to let her appearance soften me. I slid into the seat across from her, keeping my expression cold. What do you want, Elise? She fidgeted with the handle of her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. Thank you for coming. I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to explain. I owe you that much. I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. I'm sick, Daniel. I have a condition, nymphomania. It's something I developed after my last illness. It's like an uncontrollable urge. I didn't want to be this way. I didn't choose it. I stared at her, barely able to process what she was saying. Are you seriously blaming this on some condition? Her eyes filled with tears, but she pushed on. It's real, Daniel. I've been seeing a therapist. I've been trying to get help, but it's so hard to control. It's not an excuse, I know that, but I needed you to understand. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped being committed to you. The others, they didn't mean anything. They were just one-night stands. You were the only one I truly needed. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So, let me get this straight. You've been lying to me, betraying me, sleeping with God knows how many people behind my back. And now I'm supposed to believe it was all because of some condition? She nodded desperately. Yes, Daniel. I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But I swear to you, I never wanted to lose you. Please, I need you. I need us. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with desperation. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no anger, not even sadness. Just a dull, empty finality. I stood, pulling on my coat as she reached out to grab my hand. I didn't let her. Even if it's true, I said, my voice cold and steady. Goodbye, Elise. Her face crumpled, her tears falling freely now, but I didn't look back. As I walked out of the diner, I felt the weight of her lies start to lift. She had destroyed what we had, and no amount of excuses could change that. This was the end. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free. Well, it's only been a week, and I can't say for sure if I've fully recovered yet. But I've gotten tested for STDs and everything came back clear. My daughter is staying with me during the divorce proceedings, and we'll figure things out afterward. Slowly but surely, I'm starting to recover from this situation.